Good day, everybody, and welcome to Importation Basics, where we'll be learning all we need to about getting things done the right way, especially as it regards to bringing stuff down from Africa into Canada. Want to make sure we're dotting all our I's and crossing our T's and not getting into any kind of trouble. And we have a very special guest with us. Her name is Stephanie. Before I introduce her, my name is Abiodun Adetu. I'm the convener of Niger Market Day. Basically, what we do in Niger Market Day is bring your typical African open air market to your space or to any venue we go into. We've had a couple already. We've had in Brandon, we've had in Calgary, we've had in Winnipeg, and this year we are going to 8 different cities, and a lot of people will be bringing stuff in, importing goods from all over the country or all over the continent into Canada. I want to make sure we're doing them right. We had over 70 questions submitted. We streamlined some of them to meet the objective of this workshop today. And Stephanie has some of them already, and she has a presentation. Her name is Stephanie Hinrichs. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Oh, nice.
And I'm sorry, I'm having some trouble here with my computer. I don't know, can you see me still?
Right now, I can't see you, but I was seeing
Okay.
you just a minute ago.
Okay. Sometimes the connection at our office is not great if everybody's here. So I might, to get the microphone to work, the camera might not work. But regardless.
Okay. Regardless, we'll have it going.
Yes,
Okay.
as long as you can hear me, that is the main thing.
Okay, great. And I saw Abba's question asking if you can
Sure.
invite somebody to the room. Yes, you can. Stephanie is a multi-program specialist inspector. She will tell us what that entails in a short while, and she manages the Western operation of the CFIA. Welcome to the
Well,
workshop.
I definitely don't manage anybody, but I am a food safety inspector, which
Mhm.
basically means we follow up on complaints from consumers. We follow up on illnesses in joint with the province. We also help the kind of more frontline inspectors who would do the inspections on license holders. So I see a lot of varied things. We get simple complaints where things like the product doesn't weigh as much as it says on the package. There aren't allergens labeled properly on the package. We work with public health when there's illnesses. So I see a lot of things. And previous to this, I was a frontline inspector. So I would go to importers and do their inspections. So I have done that in the past. That is not my current job. So I just basically wanted to, just share some basic information kind of to help people decide if they should become importers. Because I
Oh,
think is, I think people need to do a lot of research before they start, simply because it can become very expensive. And I, I hate to see people
fail just when they're starting off.
to get kind of in over their heads.
Mm.
Because what will happen, some people seem to think that if something gets through CBSA, then they're good to go. And that's not necessarily the case. We do often, unfortunately, find things in Canada that are not allowed for sale. And kind of the most common thing we do with that, if there's not a safety, if we're not going to do a recall, which we have done, then we force them to destroy all the products. So if I do an inspection, and I have done on importers, and they have a whole bunch of stuff that is not allowed in Canada, they have to destroy it all. And then if they had something that might cause illness or sickness, or doesn't have allergens, very important one, declared properly, that can become a recall, which the importer is fully responsible for doing the recall. We just kind of watch them do it. So it's the main thing about becoming an importer is you alone, as the importer, are 100% responsible for the food once it's in Canada. So you're responsible for the safety of the food, you're responsible for the labeling of the food, and you are also responsible for doing a recall if it's needed for that food. So it is very, like, there's a lot of responsibility. Is kind of the main thing I want to ensure that everybody understands, is that when you get an import license and you put your number in when you do an import, you are taking full responsibility for that product in Canada. So that's why I recommend that before people start doing that, they make sure that they have all their documentation, that they've done all the research they need to do, so that they don't get stuck with product that they should never have had, or if something happens that it goes back to them. So even just as an example, even if I go to Walmart, or if someone has a complaint of something we bought at Walmart, we trace it back to the importer when there's a problem, because Walmart is responsible for certain parts of it, but if they did not import it themselves, then we still follow back to who the importer was. So when you look at like lots of things that are imported that you can buy, say at Superstore or Walmart, Safeway, generally they're not the ones importing it, some other company is, and then they're buying it from them, which means that import company is actually the one who has the responsibility of ensuring. We would still make Walmart say take something off the shelf that was not legal for sale in Canada, but we would also go back all the way to the importer to figure out where the mistake was made, or how to to stop them from importing more of that product, and so that they understand why they cannot import that product. I know some of the questions here were specifically about Nigeria. There are many types of foods that are just not permissible to be imported to Canada from Nigeria, simply because it is not on the list of places that most like products of animal origin. So things like meat, even things with like skin and hide, if it's to be eaten. I know one of that Cape Homo, I'm not sure, I apologize for not saying that correctly, was one of the lists. Like that's just it's not allowed in Canada if it comes from Nigeria. You could potentially make that product in Canada, but that would be a whole different conversation. There's things like that. Most dairy products also, because Nigeria is not on the list of countries that are free from foot and mouth disease. So there's lots of countries on that list. So sometimes right away, you should be identifying exactly what you want to import, and then immediately the first thing you should do is this allowed in Canada at all as an import? Because the problem with that is sometimes it'll get through CBSA because they're not opening every single package and looking at every single thing inside there. They miss things. So we can't rely on that. We as a CFIA don't rely on that. That's why we still go to importers and do in-person and virtual inspections with them, is that sometimes those things will make it through, and then you have it and you have it for sale, and then we might come and make you destroy all of it. I have unfortunately had to do that myself, and I don't enjoy doing it, but sometimes it's the only thing we can do with the product, because it is absolutely, and I mean, that goes for imports from all kinds of countries, not just, I just know on my list of questions, Nigeria was mentioned more than once. So I just wanted to so I mean, sometimes that is the main, I know many communities of people who come from other places, they find it very comforting to eat the foods that they're used to and foods that are from home. And I completely understand. My dad was an immigrant, and my auntie still at Christmas time sends us boxes of treats to eat at her house, which is allowed because we're not reselling them. So if your auntie sends you boxes of treats from other places and you eat it in your home and even just share it with your friends for no compensation, that's completely different than importing food with a license and offering it for sale. So there might be things that you could have a family member send to you to eat in your home that you cannot offer for sale because of the food safety risk. And that's kind of up to, and there's still some things that you technically wouldn't even be allowed to bring in, even just for personal use. And that's something that so as an importer, you have to know what you can bring in, if it needs special paperwork, And that's not something that, like your inspector, once you get a license, that's not, they can't tell you that necessarily. During an inspection, they can confirm things if they see things, but we don't act as consultants. So you couldn't get a license and then send me an email, say, am I allowed to import this product specifically? And then am I allowed to import that? It is very, you as the importer are the one who's responsible for figuring that out. Inspectors can help you. What I will do when we're done this is I've got kind of a document where I've gathered a bunch of information that I'm going to talk about now, and I will make sure that anything specifically we talk about, I'll add on to it, and then I will email that so that that you can review it, and that's something you can keep. So it'll have lots of government links. It will have and then kind of the unfortunate thing is then it's up to you individually to go through and find which information would apply to your business and what you wanted to import. So it can get very complicated as you choose more and more things, or depending on the product you choose. And just remember that you are always, as the importer, are always one responsible for the product. And when you import a product, you kind of, one of the first questions here was like packaging products. So for a product to legally be sold in Canada, it is supposed to have French and English labeling. So if you import a product, you, the importer, are responsible for ensuring that it has a French and English label that meets the Canadian requirements. So often what we see, and is generally totally fine, is like stickers. People will make a sticker themselves and then apply it to the product. And that is fine as long as the sticker contains all the appropriate information in French and English. So sometimes generally we wouldn't, that's something, if we found products that don't have French and English labeled, we generally try and give people time to relabel them, but they are supposed to. Now, unfortunately, I am aware that you will find many products for sale that do not have the French and English labeling. Basically, that just means that either those people are unaware of the regulations, or they are kind of just waiting until they get told they have to put the new labels on. So that is something we do run into as inspectors quite a bit. The thing with that is, if there's things like allergens in a product, that's something that's very serious and can make people very sick. If you don't have French and English labeling and there's allergens in the product, that can become a recall. So that's just something to keep in mind. There is labeling guidance on the CFIA website, which I will send you a link to. It is not easy to read. Unfortunately, I look at it almost every day and I still have trouble sometimes finding the information I want. And I generally, if people are doing their best, we just want you to be aware and to do your best to ensure you're meeting the regulations, because most of that is for safety. Because especially as an importer, now for things, if you know you're choosing a country to import from that maybe your family's from or you are from, so you might think, okay, well, I can understand this, and maybe the people in my community can read this label and it's going to be fine. But you cannot stop, like, the reason that it has to be in French and English is we can't stop someone who doesn't speak something other than French and English from going into your store and buying the product, and the law specifically says it has to be French and English, and there really isn't a lot of wiggle room. So that, I just like to make people aware of that right away. But having a computer where you can print stickers that stay on the package is an appropriate way to relabel, as long as that sticker includes all the information required by the law, which is generally like the name of the product, where it came from, the nutrition information, the size of the product. I'll send links for all these things. You won't have to remember them. But that is another very important part once the product is here. And then if you're wanting to actually repackage, so things like buying in bulk and then repackaging. So definitely reach out to your province and your local government and ensure if you need a special license for packaging and handling food, that you have it, because that does not fall under CFIA generally. So I know in Manitoba, like public health is the one who gives license and things to say restaurants, delis, butcher shops, etc. And then we handle like the labeling. So if there was a problem with labeling at, say, the deli at Superstore, we would go there to talk about the labels, but it would actually be the province. If we went there and it was really dirty, and we were, worried about the cleanliness, then we would call the province, because they're actually the ones that license people to handle and package food if it's staying inside the province. So I just recommend, because that way sometimes people get started and then they realize, oh, I need an expensive permit from the city to be able to do this. So if you have like the repackaging, which if you're running a store, especially in Manitoba, you probably have the permit. I would hope you have the permits from the province to run a store. Depending on the requirements, you may already have a permit to handle food in your establishment. And in that case, then it really doesn't concern us specifically. We do check, do you have a provincial permit? If we know you're handling food, just because we know that's a requirement in Manitoba. And then if we were worried, we would potentially reach out to the province to say, can you ensure that this business is following the provincial regulations, just because that's not a federal one. So if you're packaging from bulk, you need to make sure you're licensed from your local government. So sometimes even the municipality will want you to have, like, you'd have to check, because all of them are different, but most of the time the province will have, the provincial health board will have something related to handling food. If you package from bulk, you still need to put French and English labels on the new packages that you're making. If you just took that big bulk bag and sold it, both of those packages would need French and English labeling. If you're just emptying the bulk bag, you don't have to change the labeling, but anything that's offered for sale, so if you make smaller packages of flour or something, you would have to relabel that in every single one. And most of the time for things like that from bulk, you can just transfer the information from the original packaging, but you still have to ensure that you're including all the information that Canada requires, because not all countries are going to have exactly the same requirements. So that's kind of one of the big things, is figuring out, what does Canada require, and then the product I'm bringing doesn't meet that requirement. Sorry, I'm just looking at the number 3 question I have here is the meat and dairy. So in general, no. Now there might be some things that have a very low percentage of meat or dairy, like some mixes or things that may be okay, but that would be up to each individual importer, once you have a product you want to bring in, to figure out if it meets the Canadian requirements or not. Unfortunately, because there's so many products, we just don't have a list. We do have something called AIRS, which is Automated Import Reference System. I will send a link. It's helpful. Sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. Generally, you can pick something. So you could say 2% milk, and then you could pick what country it's coming from, what it's going to be used for, and then it will tell you yes or no, that can come in here. So I picked a couple of dairy products from Nigeria just randomly and tried them in there, and it told me they're prohibited because of foot and mouth disease in that country. There are many other countries. Another one that we see quite often, like India, they also have it. It just means that animals in that country somewhere have that disease, and we're trying not to get that disease into Canada for our animals. So that's why they say, no, you can't bring it in. And then the animal products, so that would be meat and other things made from the physical animal, as opposed to, say, like milk, are also prohibited. Part of that is because of the foot and mouth disease. The other thing is that Nigeria and Canada do not have an agreement saying that they're allowed to trade. So Canada and the US, as of today, have an agreement that says we acknowledge that your food safety system is equivalent to ours. And so any meat that meets your requirements meets our requirements as well. And you just need the paperwork for that, but it would be able to. So, I mean, there's, I don't have a list in front of me, but there's quite a few countries on that list. So there may be a country that's not Nigeria that is makes similar products that you could find or import from that you could import a similar product from, say, the continent of Africa or even South America, that a similar product from a country that allows you to import meat. So, I mean, we do see people do that sometimes to kind of, not to get around it, but to find the product they're looking for. What I do say is sometimes if you can't find a product that you really miss from home and nobody's importing it, it might be because it's just not allowed in Canada. And it's unfortunate when you want something, when you're missing something, you're looking for something specific, or you run a store and people in your community are saying, if you could get this, I would buy it because I crave it all the time. An example of this would be something like Milo, which I've seen importers bring in from Nigeria. You can get Canadian Milo in Canada. It is different. It has different ingredients, which is, I think, why people want to bring in the Milo from the country where they came from, or this person particularly, this was many years ago. They were bringing in from Nigeria because they were Nigerian. Well, the Milo from Nigeria has ingredients in it that are not allowed in Canada. So there's relabeling it. There's no way to take those ingredients out, and it's not ingredients that it's added vitamins and minerals, which just Canada's very specific on what you can add vitamins and minerals to. So we'll see lots of fortified drinks, fortified snacks, and what have you coming from other countries don't meet the requirements for sale in Canada. And those are oftentimes, we find those because they're not going to flag. You can fill out all your import paperwork completely correctly, and it's just not something that's going to show up. Like, it's not going to flag, and CDSA isn't going to necessarily take it away because they're not reading the ingredients to that level. And there are some things that are allowed fortification. Unfortunately, fortifications are fairly complicated, but it's a thing that I saw as an inspector reasonably often, is that people brought in things and they had, added vitamin C to a product that's just not allowed to add vitamin C in Canada, and it means the product must be destroyed. And it's not really up for interpretation for us. Like, it's very clearly written, we have to destroy the product. And when we destroy it, like, we watch you, put it in a dumpster and then like open all the bags and dump them out, like in a way that you absolutely can't save them, because we don't. That's the whole point of destroying it, is that it doesn't enter the marketplace. And it's not fun. I never liked doing that. I sometimes was like, I wish I hadn't even noticed that. So because it's not hurting anybody most of the time, but it is the law. So in 2020, I think it was, the Safe Food for Canadians regulations came into force, and they changed the way that food imports work. It used to be that if it wasn't like meat or dairy or honey, there was a list of things you needed a license, but for a lot of food, you did not need a license to import. You could just import it. And it was working fine for a lot of people. And then the government decided to rewrite the regulations. So every single person who imports any food for sale needs a license. And then us inspectors have to go and check that you're following all the rules. So it's not that the inspectors are targeting anybody. Once you need a license, you cannot fill out the import paperwork without a Safe Food for Canadians license. And once you have a license, then you're on our list for inspections, and we have to go inspect you when, your name gets to the top of the list. So we're not targeting people. A lot of it is, it's just, you get a list and then you just work through your list. So I've shown up places and people are very upset because they're a store down the street has not been inspected yet, and I made them destroy something and that other store still has it, which if that store has its own import license, will eventually be inspected, but sometimes it's not up to me which store I inspect next. So you will see products out there that people are selling that do not meet the regulations. You'll see them without the labeling. You'll see, this Milo imported from Nigeria with the added fortifications. And it's kind of one of those things that we're, as inspectors, slowly going through inspecting everybody. Everybody who has a license will get an inspection eventually. And in a perfect world, they would get an inspection once a year at the least. So that's something to be aware of. Once you have a license, you can be inspected. And the thing is, if you got a license, you might just be at the top of the list and you might be the first one to get an inspection. So that's just something to take into consideration. So that's why I say do your homework, have your paperwork ready in case your license just ends up on the top of these lists that we get to complete inspections in our areas. And unfortunately, you might look up and say, oh, okay, well, I'm not allowed to import this, but I know the store down the street is selling it. And I mean, you can make anonymous complaints. We do have people do that, and we would absolutely never pass on your information. So it's completely protected. It's the kind of information that if someone does an information request, it would be the blacked out information that never gets released, even if, because you can do a Freedom of Information Acts where you can get some of our records from our inspections, but we black out people's names, we black out locations, things like that. So but it's also not something that people want to do. You don't want to tattle on your neighbor. It's not. People don't appreciate that. People don't want to do that. I'm not encouraging people to specifically do that, but you will turn around after this and go, well, I know someone who's importing all the things that I'm saying right now that shouldn't be imported. And unfortunately, that is the case, and it doesn't seem very fair. And there's not really a lot, unfortunately, that I can do about that. Yeah, it's one of those kind of crappy things that I see, is that it's not that we're targeting people or anything like that. It's kind of random who has a license, what order they'll get inspected in, what we'll look at, what we'll see that day or during that inspection. And really the main thing is just knowing that as the importer, if you are the importer, you are fully responsible for, and kind of the main thing is like, yeah, the safety of the food. So kind of spoke about it a little bit with talking about the meat. So any food you bring from any country, you as the importer, before you import it, should have documentation showing that you have determined that wherever that food was manufactured, that it meets the Canadian requirements, which can be very complicated. So if you're buying straight from a manufacturer, so you pick a product, the powdered soup mix, that all the ingredients are allowed in Canada, okay, you as the importer still need to be able to say, okay, this soup mix is made in a facility that would meet the same safety standards as one in Canada. And you would need paperwork to show that. So if you're dealing directly with the manufacturer, you can often just like ask them, and they might be able to, give you a certificate that says we are inspected. Like an example of, I'm trying to think of a company. Sorry, off the top of my head, I can't think of one, but they could give you like COAs, which are like certificates of analysis that could say, okay, well, we, test this product for these pathogens every 6 months or whatever it is. Like they would have to determine that, and then you as the importer would have to determine if that is appropriate way to control the risk in the food. So that's part of this being you are responsible for the food. So even though someone else made the food because you chose to import it and now it's imported under your license, you are responsible for ensuring that that food was manufactured so Just the same way that you generally can't sell things in a store in Manitoba that somebody just made in their kitchen. Like you can make it in a provincially registered kitchen, but you are not supposed to just, make a pie at your house and then put it for sale in a store. You also shouldn't import a product that someone is making the equivalent of their house or somewhere that's not as controlled and tested and safe as we would consider a manufacturing facility. Or even here, like the province will license like commercial kitchens where you are allowed to produce food for sale. So you would want to ensure that food you're importing is produced in places and by manufacturers that meet the same safety requirements as Canada. And sometimes that can be very hard because the manufacturers might not want to give you that information, or you might just have trouble tracking them down. And I also, off the top of my head, I don't know what the food safety system in Nigeria is like, whether it's, I know for meat and things it's not equivalent. There are definitely foods that can come from Nigeria to Canada. It's just more on the importer to ensure that they're being made somewhere reputable. So I mean, something like, okay, this Milo drink is a Nestle product. So aside from pretend the ingredients are correct, again, then you go, okay, it's made Nestle, they make it in a big factory. Like that's the kind of company that generally should be able to give you like safety paperwork and say, oh yes, our local government, comes here and inspects us the same way that CFIA inspects someone in Canada or the Manitoba Health inspects a restaurant. So we have those inspections and we do testing and we do cleaning, etc. So a big company like say Nestle might be a better choice but again, you still have to ensure the product they send you is a Canadian compliant product. So the reason that Nestle makes a different Milo drink in Canada for Canadians is to ensure that the drink that they sell in Canada meets the requirements. So like that's the reason why there's two different, and they have a bunch of different versions when I kind of Google it. But that was just one I have dealt with in the past. So that's like, yeah, so it's hard. If you're bringing in, an agricultural products are a bit different. That does not fall under our regulations. I know that was, so if it's, seeds or grains or something that are not processed, they don't necessarily fall under food, but you still need to ensure that they meet Canadian requirements for seeds and grains that are being imported. If you were to say import something and then turn it into flour when it got here rather than buying it as flour, is just kind of an example. When I'm looking at the list of questions here. So yeah, it's really, unfortunately, it's very complicated to become an importer and follow all the requirements. I do often recommend to people try, and hopefully we'll get more of these as the more people want them, is finding like bigger companies who will import and then you buy it from them. So if you can find somebody, or even if people could get together and make their own company where you have people whose just their dedicated job is getting all this information for the products and getting the new labels. Because if you say, okay, say you're more like Walmart and that someone else imports a product most of the time, and then you put it on the shelf. If there's a problem, like yes, Walmart still has to take it off the shelf, but Walmart isn't the one who's responsible for labeling it. So we would still go back to the importer and say, okay, you're the one who needed to make sure that this product was safe and that you have the label correct. And now we're following up with you and making you're the one responsible, not Walmart. So sometimes it makes things simpler if you are a store owner or a shop owner. It's finding someone who you trust that is already doing the importing, because it takes that responsibility off of you. So if the label isn't right, we follow up with the importer. We don't, to make you're not the one who then has to step away from other things in your store that are making you money to figure out this label and figure out where this paperwork is And I mean, not to say you shouldn't do that. It's just, it is a lot. And we want people to do it properly. And we don't want it to be an undue burden. And I'm personally not the biggest fan of these new regulations, but we have to enforce them. And it just adds a lot. Sorry, I'm just reading some of the questions. Yes, I will get to how to get the license. So yes, I would say it is, trial and error in that picking a product, and then you have to work backwards and figure out, is this something that is allowed for sale in Canada, that, and then how can I relabel it? And then you still have to figure out how to get it here and make it affordable for your customers. So that's why sometimes it might cost more to buy something imported from somebody else who's already imported it, but it may save you a lot of trouble in not having to do all of this work on your own. So to be able to import food in Canada, you do need a Safe Food for Canadians license, is what it's called. You can apply for them online. And then depending on what kind of products you're trying to import, you either, like, sometimes it's approved without a visit from CFIA, and sometimes the CFIA will either speak to you or come and visit to ensure that you meet the requirements for importing. So if you were wanting to import meat from anywhere, we would generally do a visit. I think, we do in Manitoba, to ensure that your facility meets all the requirements, and then you have all the paperwork for meat, just because meat is a very high risk product, just because of pathogens and things like that. Like, it's one of the things that, especially if it's not stored properly, that people can get very sick. So it's through My CFIA is the website that you would apply for your license through, and then you fill out a whole bunch of questions. Sorry, and let us know what you're planning to import. Excuse me. Got a little tickle in my throat. And then you either you get a visit from us, or a phone call, or emails. Some people are pre-approved for their license, but then again, now you're automatically on our list for inspections. So to keep your license, you need to have what we call a preventative control plan, which is basically documents that go over all the things I just talked about. Picking your products, figuring out if it's safe to import, if it meets the Canadian requirements, how to relabel it. You also need to have a plan in place for recording your complaints. That's a very important one. And for doing recalls. Because if you import a product, then you are the one responsible for doing a recall if that is necessary. So say one that can happen is allergens. So allergens are very important for labeling in Canada. There's a list of priority allergens, which are things like egg, soy, milk, tree nuts, peanuts, fish. Can't think of all 7 of them off the top of my head, but there's a list. And then gluten, well, not an allergen, is on the list, and then sulfites. If they're not labeled properly and somebody has a reaction, or even if we're just doing a label review and we see the allergens are not on there, that can become a recall. And that a lot of people think we at the CFA do the recall. We do not. We watch you do the recall, and then if we don't feel like you have control, you don't know where the product came from, you don't know where it went, you're having a lot of trouble, then we will force you to do the recall. Or if you just say, I don't want to do a recall, we will then take enforcement action to ensure that the product is recalled, but it's not us who does it. We do have a recall template that gives you step by step exactly what to do. I will definitely include that in my list of links, because it's a very important one. And a lot of recalling is just knowing where you got things from and just keeping records of where you got them from, because if there is a recall in the country of origin, so say, like as an example, excuse me, say a company like Coca-Cola, they might have a recall in the States that turns out, okay, there's also a product in Canada that maybe had the same ingredient in it or had the same problem. That also needs to be recalled. So you, as the importer, have to be aware of whether there's problems with the product, where it came from. So I see a question here about informing your customers for recall. So recalls get a little bit, they can be complicated. If you are selling your products just directly to customers, like retail, someone's coming in your store and buying it, then I think there's different, I don't have it open in front of me. You'd have to take all the product off the shelf, because when you sell something in retail, so same as when you go to say Walmart and you buy something, or Superstore, they don't collect your personal information. They don't make you write down your address so that they could send you a letter if something was recalled that they have on the shelf at Walmart. They would put out probably a notice at the store level, but if they sold any bulk product to someone else that was then selling it or using it as an ingredient, you would have to send a letter to, or a phone call, or both. It needs to be in writing, but you can do a phone call first. And let them know. So say you're importing flour, and so you sell some of it in your store, but then your cousin also buys some and uses it at their restaurant. You would need to let your cousin know, or whoever had purchased it, that there was a recall. And then they would have to figure out if they made a product with that flour, where it went, and then they would potentially have to recall that. So, I mean, when we work with recalls, it's not that we just leave you flailing. We help you, but it's up to the importer or the company to do kind of the main work of the recall, and we just kind of ensure that the steps are done. I see here a question about.
Okay, so there are quite a number of questions from.
Yeah.
I just wanted you to finish, then we would go through them one after the other.
Okay. Yeah.
Thought process.
Yeah. Okay. So let me get back to
Well, please keep sending in the questions. We'll go through them.
Yes. So yes, like getting a license is very important, and I do recommend, like, just before you get the license, I can't remember what it costs. It's not super expensive, but it's also, you don't want to apply for a license, realize, oh shoot, the thing I wanted to import, it's just not going to be feasible. I can't bring it in at all. And now you've spent, $200 on this license that you're not going to use, because you don't get a refund if you decide to never import something. So I do like to say, try and do your homework before, because then you are not already monetarily invested in products, or you have products. Sometimes people will start trying to ship products before they have a license, and then it does get turned away because they don't have the right, like they don't have a license number. Excuse me. And I'm just looking through so unfortunately, I don't know a whole bunch about customs and duty fees. That's goes through CBSA, and it doesn't go through CFIA. So that's something that once you've determined what products you want and that they're allowed in Canada, then again, there are some things that will have tariffs on them, that will have duty fees, and that doesn't fall under my jurisdiction. So I really just don't know anything about that to answer any questions about it. Sorry, I'm just reading this.
I can also go through some of the questions I have here.
Yeah.
I'll go through some of those questions. So some of them are bordering on packaging, and she has said she'll send in some links where we can read more about bettering our packaging and doing it the right way. We have a couple of questions about so it's not just Nigerians that are here. We have
Yeah.
we are just with different African countries all in here and from other provinces as well. So we have a question that talks on fashion. I don't know if that's also your jurisdiction, but
That does not, unfortunately for CFA, it's food.
would
And then we do things like any like certain plant products. So things like seeds. I think there's a question here about seeds that goes through the plant health side. That especially if they're not to be used as food. So if they're not packaged as food. So if you were bringing in, say, sunflower seeds that are packaged like spits that are directly to be eaten, then that goes under the food part of CFA. If you were bringing in sunflower seeds that you were going to plant that are packaged for that, then it still goes under CFA, but it's not under a food importing license. It would be through plant health, and then each country and different kind of product has different rules, which unfortunately I am not particularly familiar with. But lots of times you need like things like phytosanitary certificates, which basically says from the country that it's coming from, this product is free of any diseases that we don't want, like plant diseases that we don't want coming to Canada. Same thing for certain things made with wood also fall under that, where they need phytosanitary, because we don't want animal plant pests to come in through wood packaging, which is another kind of, and that's something that CBSA would potentially stop, because they kind of keep an eye out for that, and that's not directly related to the food. But it is like if you're importing a whole bunch of goods from a country, it's lots of different requirements. I mainly just know about food that falls under licensing with CFA, which is a separate, if you were trying to bring in live animals, even if for either pets or eventually to be food, that also is under CFA, but it's through the animal health, which again, there's lots of different rules for lots of different places. A lot of it just depending on local diseases that we either may or may not have in Canada. There's places that you can't take Canadian animals to because we have a disease here in Canada that they don't have there. So it's not like a lot of it is reciprocal, in that there's places that Canadian things can't go to without certain permits. As an example, like China needs tons and tons of paperwork for everything that isn't there. So we're not the only country that's, like this. The States, I think, is fairly similar. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't really know anything about, say, like, fashion or electronics, anything that's not food. There are definitely regulations, but I just don't know them.
So what agency would be in charge of those?
That I think consumer protection, because there are certain like standards for things like electronics, just for like fire safety and things like that, which I do not know. I know there are certain regulations for certain kinds of clothing, like children's clothing has certain regulations, but I think it's under consumer protection, but I could be wrong on that, but that's where I'd start. They might be able to help you. And I mean, there's a lot of regulations, unfortunately. I don't necessarily agree with all of them, but I'm here to enforce the ones that I have to enforce when I have to enforce them. Yeah, I would definitely say just get ready for lots of paperwork. It's just not, unfortunately, as simple as saying, do you know what I really miss from back home is this thing. I'll import it and I'll sell it at my store. Just because as the CFA, we want all the food in Canada to meet the exact same safety requirements. So it's not that we're picking on imported food. It's simply, this is the easiest way for us to hypothetically ensure that all the food in Canada is the same level of safety at the retail level.
One question that says, must all the products have a best before?
Yes.
Yes, all of them. So this brings me to the next question, and it borders on, so for instance, there are some products that, and you mentioned earlier that this does not concern, or some agricultural products are not under some of these rules.
Yeah.
So for instance, fruits, is that under your jurisdiction, and are we able to bring fruits from back home?
Yes. So fruits would be under CFA as long as they're, if they're intended for food. And then it really depends. So you can look up the specific kind of fruits from each country through the air. So I'll send you the link, and that's that automated import reference system where you can pick. So you could say, pears, and then you would find like the specific genus of pear that you would like to bring. And then you pick the country, and then it will tell you yes, no. And then sometimes it'll say yes, but you need to also show XYZ because again, some of that is for safety. So if there's a country that has, certain kind of diseases of the fruit trees, we might not want those fruit coming to Canada because we don't want that disease to affect Canadian fruit trees. So it's very specific to countries and the products because there might be, apples might be okay from one country, but oranges are not because they're different kinds of trees. So they could have different risks. So one of the important things about deciding to be an importer and deciding what to import is in your preventative control plan that we want you to have, we want you to do what's called a hazard analysis, which is take every product and say, what are the potential hazards? So do I have an example in here? Open my example here to read for you. So you could say, okay, I'm importing cookies. Am I worried about a biological hazard? If they're packaged properly, not so much. A chemical hazard, that's what we would consider, say, an allergen. So we want to make sure that if there's peanuts or eggs or wheat in the cookie, that it says that on the package. And then physical hazards, one of the things on here is plastic from the packaging or say metal from mixing the cookies before they're baked. And then you would have to decide how are those hazards being controlled. So in the example here, I has these hazards are addressed by the foreign suppliers because they're imported during packaging and labeling. So you would ask say it's Oreo as an example. Oreo would be able to say, okay, we are licensed by our local government. So say this example here is for the US. So say it's Oreo and it's in the US. They would say, okay, we're licensed by the FDA. We have a program in place where we use, because we have lots of metal in our facility, all the cookies go through a metal detector before they get shipped. So we're fairly, that's how we make sure that there aren't pieces of metal in the cookies, just because all our mixing equipment is made of metal. So if one of those broke, and metal could get in the cookie. So we use a metal detector to ensure no metal's in the cookie. We review all the packaging to ensure that when wheat flour is used, wheat is put on the package. Everything that we put eggs in has eggs on the package, so we don't. So you, as the importer, need to have all that information for all the products.
No,
so that you know what the potential, so for things, if you were saying, one of the other ones is black peppercorns, as an example. One of the things we'd be worried about potentially is salmonella. So wherever you get it from, you would want them to tell you how they're ensuring there's no salmonella in there, just because that is something that has been found in spices before. We'd also potentially be worried about some pesticides because other countries may not have the same pesticide regulations. So you would need to know that if you're getting these peppercorns from country X, that either the manufacturer or the supplier is testing them or they might say, okay, we're not this, it's organic, so there's no pesticides used on it. And we have the certification for that. So that's how you ensure there's no pesticides that end up on the end product. So that's what I mean by it's very labor intensive to pick your product and then ensure that it meets the Canadian requirements and that you can show that either yourself or the manufacturer is ensuring there's no hazards. So again, things like, cookies or anything that's kind of mixed together. If there's metal equipment used, like what are they doing to ensure that if something breaks, the metal doesn't end up in the product? Or if it does, that they would find that product and discard it. Just as an example, like we just had a very large salt recall not that long ago in Canada, and it was because a piece of equipment broke and metal got into the salt, and it didn't get caught until the salt ended up at someone who was using that salt to make a different product, and they found the pieces of metal. So then it turns out all the salt that had been made at the same time as that all had to be pulled off the shelves in Canada. And it wasn't that salt didn't go into packages of salt on a shelf. It almost exclusively went to people who made something else, like pizzas and chicken fingers and all kinds of things that end up with a little bit of salt in them. So it's very important, especially when things are coming from far away, that the importer is confident that they're safe, simply because like the person buying it is so far removed from the place that it came from that they can't. If I go to your restaurant and I look around and I go, oh, well, this restaurant's really dirty and it smells bad, I could choose not to eat there. But when you go to the store and something's packaged, you have no way of knowing that that food was made in a place where it was clean and everyone washed their hands and the equipment was in good repair. So that's why it's extra important to ensure. And I mean, everything that's manufactured, we like to ensure. Yeah, even like that's the thing. When I go to a manufacturer in Manitoba, I'm looking at their metal detector and I am checking whether they're doing lab testing for pathogens, and I'm checking when they wash the floor. So when you're choosing to import a product, you need to ensure that the manufacturer is doing all those things.
I have this question. So I know for the health units, there are some products we kind of bring in, and for them, their concern is if it has no water activity or no moist, then the possibility of, rearing bacteria is almost next to zero, and then they are fine with such products. How does that work with your own team?
So,
Even though some of these products might not, I don't know. So for instance, let's say dried fish or crayfish. These are
so
products. Mhm.
again, you'd have to, so for CFIA, so for just allowability into the country, you'd have to pick, okay, you want crayfish, then you'd have to go through AIRS, figure out, can I get crayfish from this place? Then a lot of that is put on you. I don't know that we have lists of those things where it's more like, okay, you have to figure out as the importer,
Mhm.
is this going to be safe by the time it makes it to Canada? How is it stored? I know you and I had talked earlier how we need to take into account that certain things packaged in another country might not be packaged in a way that they would travel well. And that is up to because when you get it, if it's been cold or it got wet, or like there's things that might be packaged and they go straight from the manufacturer to store shelves in another country, and then people buy and eat it, but when you put it in a container and you ship it across the ocean and then it sits at customs and then it moves here, it might not show up in as good of. So that is one of the things that we would say, okay, you as the importer need to know that risk, and then you have to figure out how to control it. So whether it's this is not stable, so transporting it or keeping it for X amount of time is not appropriate, because one of the, which is kind of broad, like you're not allowed to sell things that have gone bad, or so best before dates are a little bit complicated because not all products need a best before date. It's really dependent on the product. You can sell things past the best before date, but you can't sell things that have gone rotten or bad. So sometimes when things are in transport, that will happen even though it hasn't passed the best before date, just because sometimes you can't control everything about how something is transported, or there's things that just would not do well in transport, and that is up to you. I can double check, but I don't know of any lists that say, other than if you go on AIR, sometimes it'll just say like, these are things you just can't import because the risk is too high. And that's kind of not necessarily up to us. Like that CBSA holds those lists. It's a combination of us and CBSA and Health Canada that determines what products can and cannot be imported or exported. So that's one of those things that's very much up to, so we might ask you during an inspection, how did you choose? Like, how did you determine that this product was safe and you should be able to show us
Okay,
the
is this
process you went
for
through?
the importer or if you're just the person selling it? Would you ask
That's if you're
for
an importer.
the
If you're the
importer?
importer. So if you go to Walmart and buy something, bring it back to your store and resell it, then that's not a question we would ask you because you're not an importer, you're not responsible for that. So say you have a product on your shelf and there is a recall and you were not the importer. You would get notified to say, please don't sell this product anymore, take it off the shelf, throw it away, etc. We, the CFA, would follow up with the importer to say, okay, we want to see all your paperwork and how you're doing this and how you're controlling it. If you are not the importer, then that responsibility does not fall to you. Unless you are the manufacturer of the food. So either if you manufactured the food or you imported the food, you are the one responsible for the safety of the food to a point. I mean, if you have a store, if you don't import, but your store is hypothetically filled with mice and they're chewing holes in all the bags and things are going bad, you are responsible for that because you weren't. But if you were buying a product from a manufacturer and it's bad way before the best before date and you're following all the instructions, or somebody's getting sick and they bought it at your store, but it's completely packaged and you handled it correctly, that is not your responsibility necessarily. You would likely want to not continue selling that product if it has a problem with it systemically. But us and generally the province during like a recall, if they're part of it with us, is we go back to the manufacturer or the importer because they are generally the ones, like they're the ones who need to ensure that that product is safe and packaged for the intended purpose. Like if you repackage it, then that gets a bit more complicated. But if you're just importing or you're just selling something that you bought from somebody else who is either imported or manufactured, then you're responsible for much less. That's another reason why I say sometimes it might be worthwhile to find somebody who is already importing, who has the staff. Like if you go to like a big, company who imports for say Walmart, they have 10 people whose full-time job is removing labels and ensuring that they meet Canadian. You know what I mean? Like if they're doing a big volume, then they have people who are focusing on that and are very good at it. You can also hire consulting companies. We don't recommend any specific companies, but there are definitely companies that can help with things like labeling, because that can be very tricky. There may also be companies that can help choosing foods to import. That I don't know. But that's why I said I often say to people it might cost more money up front, but sometimes finding somebody who's importing something that you're interested in, and they're the ones taking on the risk of doing these hazard analysis, figuring out if the manufacturer is allowed to sell to Canada, figuring out if the labeling is correct, and then if there's a problem, it's not directly on you because you are not the importer. So that's always, I don't know that there's necessarily lots of people out there doing that, but I could see a need for it. Just looking at importers that I have inspected, just it's a lot of work, and having someone who can really dedicate their time to the importing and the safety part of it kind of would make it say easier than trying to run your store and having every time you want a new product trying to figure out. And then the other thing is keeping that information up to date. So if you decide, okay, I'm going to import Oreos from the States, you have to keep checking. You can't just check once that the factory is licensed and that the labeling is correct. You would have to check, it's kind of up to you, but every 6 months, once a year, to make sure that the product still meets their requirements and that the requirements haven't changed. Sometimes requirements change, sometimes products change. So it unfortunately can get very, very complicated.
You just have to be like on top of it all the time to make sure.
Yeah. So, even when we visit big facilities, often, yeah, they'll have one or two people who are just dedicated to each step of their process, just because there's so much information that you need to know, rather than, so it's not to say that smaller places can't be importers. I just think it was much easier when you didn't need a license, and the CFIA was really, in the past, it was more safety based. So if there was a safety concern, then we were following up with importers, smaller importers. Now everyone needs a license. We're following up with everybody. So, I mean, you could argue that that makes it more fair. Big importers are getting inspected, small importers are getting inspected. But to me, sometimes it's like, well, there was no problem with the small importers. We could have just left them alone. We can just, as long as there's no safety concerns, then we're okay. And now, yeah, it's getting, but yeah, it is what it is. That's the regulations. We have to enforce them. I don't want to tell people don't worry about it, because then one of us will show up and I'll say, okay, now you have to destroy $3,000 worth of product while I stand here, even though, yeah, like if I hadn't noticed it, you would have kept selling it and probably no one would have died. But yeah, it gets very complicated. I wish there was just an easy answer. Here, fill out this form, and you can import.
Well, I mean, some of these policies and requirements are pretty archaic. Is there anything like, are there plans in place, especially seeing the diversity of Canada right now, to maybe update some of these rules?
Some of these rules are brand new, so they probably won't get changed anytime soon, unfortunately. And then in theory, they slowly update things. I mean, a lot of it is like consumer pressure. So if they see people asking for things, like now, starting here shortly, package will have to say like high in sugar or high in, so like if you buy a bag of candy, it's gonna have a little warning on it that says high in sugar. And that's one of those things that somebody decided it and now it's getting pushed down. So once that, I can't remember usually there's a time frame. So when the rules change, generally there's like a 3 to 5 year window where we say you have a chance to change over to meet the new requirements, but you have to be kind of paying attention to notice when they're happening. You can reach out, like not to me directly, but it's Health Canada makes the rules and then CFIA generally enforces them, is how it works. So sometimes reaching out to Health Canada, I know there are certain products that you can get things like, I think they're still called temporary marketing authorizations. You need a bunch of paperwork for that too, but that is one way to get products start selling products in Canada that weren't initially allowed. So one of the things that started that way is the energy drinks. So you used to not be able to add like taurine and things to drinks specifically, but then they became very, very popular. They were selling in the States. Health Canada was like, whoa. So while they did their homework to decide if energy drinks are safe, they gave certain companies authorization. So like say Red Bull, for example, had authorization to sell energy drinks in Canada, even though technically the legislation said you couldn't sell an energy drink. Then 10 years later, they changed the rules so that now you don't need that special permit to make an energy drink. You just have to follow the rules for energy drinks. So like in Canada, there's less caffeine, I think, than is allowed in some other places. So there are things that do change, especially when there's market and consumer pressure. So talking to like local politicians sometimes helps. Reaching out to the province and saying, there's a community here and there's a need. There's certain things like meat from certain countries. It's just, if there's Health Canada's decided, it's too much of a risk, that's probably not going to change. But some of these fortification things could potentially change if if it's safe, if it proves to be safe, and a lot of the times if it's been a product that's been sold in another country for a long time, generally it's just sometimes Canada isn't on agreement, or they just haven't even looked into it. They just say, no, this isn't a food we normally eat in Canada. We don't consider it a food. So those things do change over time as there is industry pressure and consumer pressure. So it's possible things will change. There's certain things like meat from certain countries that I don't think will change unless there is an actual change in that country. Like say they are able to get rid of that disease. So now it's safe for pigs to come from that country to Canada. Then that would change it. But just asking wouldn't change something like that.
I have a question that borders on honey and charcoal. So are those products kind of like allowed? I know.
Let me double check. Let me look up honey here. And it depends where they're coming from. So just as an example,
Like in Ghana, for instance.
sorry, I'm just trying to find. I'm just looking one of these up in airs.
And we'll be sending all the links out later in the day.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah,
have-
I've got a whole, like, as I'm talking to you, I have a document that I'm reading from and I'm adding to it, and I will send you all the links with a little bit of information. So yeah, I'm just quickly looking up honey here. I'm just picking Nigeria because that's one we've been talking about, but I can also look at another one. So it may be allowed, but there's paperwork that needs to go with it. And that's something that it doesn't directly have on here. So again, it depends. There are, Canada's fairly, well, I don't want to say picky, picky's not the word. Sorry, I've got sorry, I've got 17 windows open here. Like the labeling of honey is very, like there's different grades, there's different names. For Canada, that is we're very particular about that to ensure that, because honey is kind of like olive oil in that people will label it fraudulently to make more money, or they'll like mix it with things to, to sell it for full price. And so I haven't ever been involved in it, but I know sometimes we just go out to the stores and take honey to the labs just to ensure that it is what they're saying it is, same as with olive oil. So it appears that honey with the right paperwork could come from Nigeria. And again, that's real, it's possible, but you'd have to ensure that you have all the right paperwork so that, because I think honey is one that CBSA does potentially check, and that we sometimes go out and check, just because it is one of the ones that we do unfortunately see people labeling it incorrectly just because it's a reasonably expensive product, and people will pay more money from it. So again, with every yeah, and you need things like certificate of analysis for things like honey, where you would want the manufacturer to be able to tell you that they have tested it for certain things.
There's an interesting question here. So it's on the momo, the cow skin.
Yes.
So I mean, one of the things you had mentioned earlier was that if they are made in Canada under certain conditions, they're, anyways, they're actually sold in stores right here because they are from meats from this part. But then,
Yeah,
is it remotely possible that there are some permits that we could get to be able to bring the kind of cow skin that we eat into the country?
it would not appear so, simply because it is an animal product. So specifically from Nigeria, it looks like because there is foot and mouth disease in Nigeria.
You see?
Foot and mouth disease, it's an animal disease that like there's a lot, it's in India, it's in a lot of places. It just means that we don't, because the cows, pigs, there's a couple different animals that can get it anyway. We don't have it in Canada, so they don't want it to come into Canada when people are shipping animal products from places that do have that disease. So it does not appear that unless something changed with the disease status of the animals. Now, that's not to say that there isn't another, I don't know, but there might be another African country that might, have similar cattle that are allowed to import meat products. And then it could potentially come from a country that is meat products or animal origin products, I should say, because like the skin is not meat, but it comes directly from the animal. So it's possible. That is something that somebody would have to really look into, just because that's the kind of thing that would potentially get flagged at the border. And also because certain food products that come from animals, you need a very specific license to be able to import them. So not only does the country, it's to have meat on your import license, then us in the province, I think the province would have to visit your facility, and we would often, so if like a bigger company is getting meat into Canada, they will receive the meat, it will be in a locked area, and then we will have to visit while they unlock the trailer to ensure that the meat on the trailer is what was loaded, say in the US or in another country. Like there's special ways, and then we need to make sure that you have the adequate facilities. So even though I know this cow skin it appears to be like a dried product that isn't, it's not frozen steaks, but some meat and like animal products, regardless of how they're done, we still need to follow the same requirements. So if you put meat on your license, then you have to follow much more. And I mean, it would be the same as if you have a deli in your store front versus not having a deli. If you're kind of more of a convenience store and you don't, or just dry goods and you just don't package any meat. So then you don't need to worry about coolers and things like that. So once you have meat products, certain kinds of meat products, then you need to show us on the province that you can store them properly. So I would say that one is possible, but would likely be complicated.
I have this other question. So, I mean, in most African countries, you have the system whereby you really do not have to go to the store to buy what you need. You might just have a house down the road that kind of like sells everything you need, like a neighborhood mini mart kind of thing. And I know in Calgary, folks are allowed to have those kind of, grocery stores within their home, but they are permitted. In stores like that, you would expect that a large percentage of people visiting there would be from the community, not necessarily the general public. So in this case, I know you mentioned that there are some products, if you're bringing them in for yourself, then yes, you're able to take them because, I mean, it's for almost like personal use. But for stores that are like almost community oriented and very personal, are they or can they be allowed to, have some of this product without necessarily going through all of the, you know, um,
No, unfortunately. The short answer is just no. They have to meet all the same requirements that say, a bigger grocery store or even Walmart. And I mean, sometimes it doesn't seem fair because Walmart has the money to have consultants and, thousands of people in the back doing paperwork and figuring out all the things, and then, the cashier at the front, or even the person who owns the store isn't necessarily making all the decisions. Unfortunately, anytime something is offered for sale, and so, I mean, if you bring in for personal use and you share it with people who are in your home, but if you were bringing it in for personal use and you were giving it to your neighbors and you do that all the time, that still counts as selling technically. So it's one of those things that, I mean, again, if you get a package from a family member in another country and it's got some food and you eat it in your home and your neighbors, and you're like, oh, here, have a bite of this. That is not something we're going after. But if you are pretending that it's for personal use and distributing it, that is when you could get in trouble if you're found out, basically. So I don't recommend that as a way to get around, because especially like, I think here anyways, the province is potentially the one that would be dealing with that more than us, because we don't I mean, we take the food away, but the province is the one who can give fines for basically selling food without meeting the proper requirements. So if you're in Calgary and you have a permit to run a small business like that out of a residence, like then that would be fine, because your local government is saying, yes, this is okay. But if you're, and the personal amounts are reasonably low, so it's not like you can't just bring unlimited amounts of things in personally. It's just like, if you get a package for your birthday or a package for Christmas, or you go on a vacation and you bring things back, like then you're allowed certain amounts of things that are not allowed for resale in Canada as personal. I mean, the same way that you are allowed to take your medications with you when you go on vacation, you're allowed to take a certain amount of medications with you, because they anticipate, if I take medicine every day, I'm going to need it on the 2 weeks I'm on vacation, so I'm allowed to take it, but I can't take a year's worth of medication with me on a 2-week trip, or they're going to ask, well, what are you doing with it? Like, that would flag to go, are you either staying longer than you said, or are you not going to bring that medication back with you? So that's just an example. So I mean, there are things that you can have as a treat, you can bring in for your family, but you're only going to get yourself in trouble if you try to bring things in for personal usage and then sell them, because you do not have to exchange money for it to be considered for sale. It just has to be like the intent. It's different. If you have a barbecue and your friends are over, you can feed them whatever. But if you're getting things in the mail and you're delivering them to your neighbors every time, they get half and you get half, then that becomes where it would be a problem.
So my other question is, so let's say and I know we dealt on it a little bit. It was pretty interesting, on the sizing of products, because while we're talking, we mentioned that you might want to buy ketchup, for instance, and you see it in a 300 ml bottle,
Yes.
and then you're not allowed to sell it in Canada, because yours is in maybe 190 ml, and you're wondering, is the same product, why am I
Yes.
selling it to? So maybe you might want to share that.
And so that is, I'm just going to pull up the exact regulation here, just for a second. Just so that I can exactly.
So what we're saying is, you might have a product in a particular size and is allowed to be sold in that size, or you could have the same product in a different size and then it's not allowed to be sold.
Yes, and that one is 100% a silly regulation, but it is technically a regulation that is enforced. So that is definitely not something that I would ever specifically look for. So I'm just trying to find the actual table so I can give you an example. Of course, no, I can't. But yeah, it is see, and this is what I mean. Sometimes even I look at these regulations all day long for my job, and sometimes I'm like, I cannot figure out where on our website they have this. Unfortunately, we do not make some of this easy to understand. There we go. Yeah, and they just changed it even, so it's not going to get better.
Oh,
So, okay, honey is actually one of them. So honey can either be, if it's less than 375 grams, it doesn't matter. It can be any size under 375, but then above that, it's either 500, 750, 1 kilogram, 1.5. So if you imported a jar of honey that was 800 grams, that's technically not allowed in Canada. So I mean, that is probably the last one you're going to get in trouble for, but it is a regulation. I found out about it because I was doing an inspection on someone that was importing, I believe it was relish, and they did not have it in the right size of container. And so they couldn't import it anymore unless the manufacturer put it in a different container. Yeah. Relishes, pickled relishes, and chutneys. So if they're more than 125 milliliters, they have to be 250, 375, 500, 750 a liter, 3.78 liters. Like, it's very specific. So that is just one of the fun little things that you as the importer would have to be aware of. And that is like, that's a link I can put in. I'll make a note here. I'll put it in there. One of the other links I will include is food additives. So even between Canada and the States, they're not consistent. So there are things that are made in the States that have certain food additives that are not allowed in Canada. So sometimes things like the amount, some of them are preservatives. So in Canada, you're allowed X amount percentage of preservative in certain kinds of food. It's, yeah, as the importer, you are responsible for knowing that for each of the foods you and just ensuring that the foods you import do not have more than the allowable amount, or a preservative or a coloring that is not allowed in Canada. So that's what I mean by it's very picky. So sometimes you might think, okay, this isn't on a list of prohibited things. Okay, it doesn't have fortifications. Oh shoot, it's in the wrong container size because it's honey or it's relish, which is honey. I would say you get noticed sooner. I mean, but I did on an inspection, I was just going through what are the requirements for relish, checking that he had all his requirements correct. And I was like, oh shoot, you don't have this correct. And he had to stop importing it because he didn't buy enough from the manufacturer for the manufacturer to change the container size, because it was an American product that he was putting a French and English label on once he got it. And he would basically have just had to get, like, he was just relabeling it and then selling it. He was not changing it in any way. So he wasn't set up to put it in different size bottles, because then he would have needed a whole other set of things to do to be able to put it in different size bottles as well as labeling it.
Interesting. My next question is on frozen products. So for instance, you get stuff from back home and they're brought in frozen. Do you have regulations around those? And then what are the risks, especially for maybe something like snail or some
So I mean, whether the snails are so one of the things I would say, if you're the importer, you would have to ensure that if a product, you bought it frozen, that it stays frozen the whole time. Because that would be a food safety risk, right? Because just like same as we don't want, I mean, even when you buy something at the store in the summertime, you don't want to leave meat in your car for 3 hours before you get home and put it in your fridge if it's 30 degrees outside, because then that's going to potentially be a safety issue, especially if you say then turn around and have a barbecue for your neighbors. So it'd be the same with an importer. You would have to ensure anything that's frozen that it's either it's safe if it thaws, or that you are transporting it in a way that it stays frozen. So that's part of the reason why when people import meat products is that we would go and actually inspect them when they get here, is to ensure that they've been handled correctly. So even I have been in places where, mostly for meat exports, where they're frozen, like certain countries will have certain temperature requirements. So I've been in a meat handling facility where they had one room that was 10 degrees colder because that one country wanted the meat frozen at a colder temperature than the other country who got frozen meat from them. So, and then when we did our paperwork, we would say, okay, this product that's going to country A was kept at minus 20 degrees, and this product that's going to country B is kept at minus 30 degrees because that country wanted it. So, and then part of the export paperwork for that product was the transport companies are ensuring that it stays that cold so that their trucks are that cold when the product's in it. And then if it goes on a boat, that the storage containers there stay. So that would be my main concern with buying frozen things, is how are you as the importer ensuring that it stays frozen? If the risk is that it's thawing, so that would be part of your hazard analysis, saying I'm buying this frozen product, it needs to stay frozen in transport, or potentially there'll be a risk of pathogens or it going bad. So that's completely up to the importer. And I mean, again, that would be something that first check if that's allowed. Like, I don't, because snails are, like, they fall under fish and mollusks. And again, so certain places might have diseases in their waterways or in their fish or things like that, or snails, that we don't want in Canada. So that would be one that I would consider. Like, fish is a separate category, but it's similar to meat in that it's high risk material, and especially if it's not kept at the right temperature. Because even if it won't necessarily make all the other snails in Canada sick, you might become sick if it's, is warm in transport, and then even if it's frozen when you get it, if it didn't stay frozen. Excuse me. That is one of the hazards that the importer would have to control for.
We have about 23 more minutes to maximize the time. We have a few more questions, and this
Sure.
one will be on inspection. So saying that, do you give notice before you go inspect a facility or a store? And then what are the things you look out for outside the food labeling and safety and all that? Are there other things you look out for? And how much do you give for compliance? And the last,
sorry.
There are 4 questions in one. I should have warned you. Is there an advice inspection done for new? Maybe this is saying, is there like some sort of advanced inspection done for new importers? Almost like training or something?
So generally what happens, so you apply for your license, and then either you need an inspection before you get your license, which happens sometimes if you want to import meat. There's a couple other things that you would get an advanced inspection for. If generally for a regular inspection, we do make an appointment. We don't have to. We usually do because it makes more sense for us to show up for an inspection when we know that the license holder is going to be at work. Like, some people aren't there on Mondays, or even now some people go to a store and the manager's not there because they're not there every minute the store's open. So generally we make an appointment, and we would tell you what we're looking for, that, or kind of give you an advance of, this are the things that my inspection is focusing on. But part of the inspection is, once we get there, if we see something that is concerning, then we would include that in our inspection. Excuse me. Or we would potentially call in, say the province, if we saw something Like just as an example, if it was, very, very dirty in there, we saw a mouse or something, that might not fall under our requirements, but we would still be concerned about it. That's just an example. So generally you would get heads up. Also, we'd want to review some of the documents you have. So we would give you a chance. We would say, okay, these are the documents I'm going to want to look at. Either have them ready for me, or you can email them to me and I can look over them before I go to the store, and then we can talk about them. We can go without letting you know.
Mhm.
So sometimes that happens. I don't know how often they're doing it. When I do food safety inspections, sometimes we go without, just because the nature of it is more time sensitive. So it's sometimes easier to just go and talk to somebody than it is to phone and try to make an appointment. I mean, basically, doing an inspection, I can actually send you, it's very long. We have our guidelines for exactly how an inspection should go. It's all published on our website and kind of says, this is what an inspector will look for. When I was doing inspections, before I went, I usually sent people an overview. These are the things I'm going to look at. This is what I'm going to want to talk about. If you have questions, let me know. And while we're doing the inspection, you can ask me lots of questions. The CFIA, there's a certain list of things that we consider like high priority non-compliances that need to be addressed immediately, but that could result in, say, a product being taken off the shelf, destroyed immediately, or a recall done if we thought this product you had sold a large, or you rather than just selling it to customers who just use it for themselves, if you are supplying people who are using it as an ingredient for something else that they are selling, etc., we take that all into account. So we could pull products from the shelves. We could ask you to destroy products. We can take products for testing if we thought that was necessary. Most of the time, if there's not a food safety, or it's not one of our kind of top things that we're focusing on, we will give you time to fix your problem. So a lot of times we find imported products that do not have the correct labels on them. If we don't see a safety risk, then you get anywhere from 30 to 90 days to fix that labeling problem. And we would tell you specifically, we wouldn't just say there's a problem with the label. We would say, you don't have the nutrition information in the correct format. This is the correct format. And you have, it depends on what exactly is wrong. We have a chart that gives timelines, but let's say, and you have 60 days to fix this. And then at the end of that 60 days, we would review it again. And we try to make sure that you fully understand what the issue you need to fix is. The CFIA tends to not give many fines unless there's a real safety issue going on. That tends not to be the problem. The main thing I would say for importers is that if you have product that's just not allowed in Canada, we don't let you take it home, we destroy it, or we make you destroy it in front of us. It's kind of the main, I would say, action that if we were going to take an action immediately, that would kind of be what it is. If there's, so we've done that for things like if we find, like ghee from countries where milk products are not allowed to be imported from, then it just has to be destroyed in front of us. But for things like labeling problems, sometimes if you're having trouble, you don't have certain kinds of paperwork, as long as we don't determine it's a safety issue, we will give you time to get your paperwork sorted or start. If you don't have paperwork for something that happened 6 months ago, you can't just make it up. We will give you time to now you need to start recording it moving forward, and then we will check that you are recording that information. So we try very hard to work with people to help, as long as it's not a safety issue or one of our very high priority issues that we have a specific list of them. We try to work with you because I, especially personally, I don't want to stop you from running a business. I don't want to cause you stress. In a perfect world, you would have done all your paperwork and all your hazard analysis and gotten all your documents ready, and then I won't find anything. Or if I find something labeling small, okay, you get 60 days to change it. It's not, we try not to make things hard. We don't really do fines. We try not to kind of do that. If there's enough problems, we could eventually cancel your license so you cannot import anymore. So, I mean, that doesn't happen very often.
That's relieving.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely doesn't happen very often. It would have to be, and again, sometimes that would be like people are importing things that are very unsafe for people to consume. And kind of circling back around, like, it's a smaller community, a local community is not more or less important safety wise. Like, we can't say, oh, you're just importing some stuff from your home country and you're only selling it to people in your community. We're not as concerned that it's safe. Like, that sounds very bad. Like, if we, like, when I say it like that, oh, we're not going to check your stuff because we're not worried. You can kind of turn that to be like, oh, well, we don't care if you get sick from this food, which is not the case. We want everybody's food, regardless of whether you get it from a small local store, whether you go to Walmart, whether you get it from your neighbor. If you're paying for it, we want it to be safe. So we have to hold everybody to the same standard. It can just seem like a lot of paperwork for smaller businesses, and I understand that.
I have another question that
Yeah.
borders on skincare products. And so, for instance, organic oil or butter, skin butter, and stuff like that, made from back home, or some of the ingredients are brought in from back home, and then they're making it here.
If it's not food or like a live animal or like you're going to plant it, then it's not CFIA. There is like a cosmetics act, and I don't know who would. Just trying to see if there's something. Of course, I'm not getting companies that want to sell me cosmetics in my like for that. Yeah, I don't really know anything. If it's not for use in food, then it doesn't fall under a safe food for Canadians license. So the safe food for Canadian license is only for things that are food. Now, if you import, say, an oil that could be used as a food or could be used as cosmetics, like if it's the same kind of oil, then you would, if you're only importing it for cosmetics, you would just need to make sure that that's how you put it on your paperwork. And if you're importing it for food, you need to make sure that that's what's on your paperwork. Because there might be different requirements if people are eating it versus using it in cosmetics. And I don't know what they are, but I'm just saying that would be something to look into to ensure that you do your paperwork correctly.
The next one is organic products, but therefore, say organic drinks like hibiscus tea, or just some healthy drink products. What are the requirements if they are made from back home? I want to assume the answer will be they have to be made in a proper facility.
Yes. So it'd be the same as all the other foods. And then some products, so like I said before, like energy drinks, because they're kind of like that in between, they were new. So if there's things like that, sometimes depending on the ingredients, they're either not allowed in Canada or we don't consider them food. So certain things we call natural health products. So if you just buy like a bottle of vitamins, those are considered natural health products. Sometimes when you can get like certain drinks and bars and things like that, that, have like some protein bars, certain powders and things that you would take more as like a vitamin or a mineral, like more like vitamins, you know what I mean? Like that is not considered food. It's considered a natural health product. And then there's specific rules for those. And a lot of them just relate to how they market them. So like Tylenol is allowed to say, you know, we'll stop your headache, but you aren't supposed to say, you know, you can't say, oh, if you drink this can of Coca-Cola, it's going to cure cancer or it's going to make your headaches go away, because that's not, like, it's not tested for that. So that is, those get kind of confusing because sometimes they're food. So things like, so what happened is an energy drink kind of used to be what we would consider a natural health product based on the regulations because it has these added things to it. And now, because it's so common, we consider it a food, but they had to change the regulations to be able to do that. So some of those things might be considered food, and then and some might be considered natural health products. Both ways, you need to make sure that they're made in a safe facility and that the ingredients are allowed in Canada and that they're labeled properly once they get here.
Thank you. I have an interesting question. So, and I want to assume the answer is no, but I would ask you, and let's see if I've learned a thing or two. So you import, you have someone that has a CFI license to import goods here from back home, and you buy from them and resell. Do you need a CFIA license yourself, or you're just good because, I mean, you're not an importer, you're just buying off them?
So if all you're doing is reselling the product, you do not need a CFIA license. Yeah, so that's why I was kind of saying it might be worthwhile to try and find a bigger company who's already importing and taking on that risk. And then you aren't responsible for all, I mean, you're still responsible for choosing safe products to sell. But if there was a problem, it ultimately goes back to the importer and not, like, you might still, I have gone to places that were not the importer of a product that was not allowed in Canada, and we still destroyed the product at their store, but then we also went to the importer so that we could ensure that they stop importing it, because it isn't, but like, so I mean, it's still not amazing if you end up with products that were imported and that shouldn't have been, but other than potentially taking products off their shelf, we kind of wouldn't do anything else as long as you weren't, if you just are reselling something that you bought from a supplier who is also an importer, then it's not. We would follow up with the importer to ensure that the labeling is correct. So if something's on your shelf that's not labeled correctly and it's not imported by you, we would go to the importer to fix the labels.
This next question is on the egg recall, and they're asking if you could maybe give us a little bit more insight into what happened. Was it that the eggs were infected by salmonella, or that the bread feed was infected? I don't know.
I don't know a whole bunch about the chicken. I can read. I can only see for that one what is on the recall website.
Them are from compliment. As a matter of
It was
fact,
there was a couple different kinds of eggs, because I know I did, like, I worked on a follow-up, which is basically once the recall happens, we check and make sure that the stores have stopped selling the product that's recalled. But I wasn't involved in the product actually being recalled. Let me just pull up that recall. Certain brand shell eggs. It has the details.
you're waiting for that. If you have a question I haven't had time to ask, or probably I didn't ask properly, you could raise your hand and I'll give you a minute or two.
Yeah, so there was some test results came back positive for salmonella. So I'm not sure if the tests were done somewhere where the eggs were being packaged, or if they were done in a barn, or I don't know for sure. No one has become ill with salmonella as of right now. Still, I would not recommend, if you have the affected eggs, do not eat them. But no one has gotten sick that we know of. But there was a test result that was positive for salmonella, which is why all the eggs that could have also had, that were part of that testing batch, have been recalled.
Now, and my next question before I ask the last one I have on the screen is, so for instance, these eggs are out there and they have been distributed far and wide. You still see them in some local stores, and these local stores probably don't know or they really don't care because just a couple of days ago I bought one. I wasn't even going to check, but something just said, check, and I did, and I found out one of them, was
Oh,
the recall. And where
when
I got them from were pretty far away from my house. So I just took the pictures and got the details. And I'm like, okay, send them a mail on IG to say I got this from your store. I don't know where I threw the receipt, but they have this. So maybe you would want to check others just to be sure you're not reselling. Not everybody would have been that diligent. Even myself, I probably, if I were in a hurry, I wouldn't have checked. And then I would
yeah,
have.
and once we're done this call, if you can give me some more details about that, because then I will bring that up. Because okay, so part of what happens with a recall, so if you were an importer, you have to know this. Once okay, so say you're the person, say you're the company who put these eggs in the carton, you would send out letters, emails, phone calls to all the places you sold the eggs to. And then if so you're the packager, you send out all these emails to say like Sobeys head office, and then Sobeys head office would send out all these letters to all their individual stores and say, okay, we have these, we know we sold you these eggs with this date on them. You need to take them off the shelf. You need to do this. And then what CFIA does is we're talking to them this whole time. And then once they're kind of done the recall, inspectors like myself, we will get a list of some of the places that would have had the eggs, and we call them and say, were you notified of the recall? Do you have this product left? And if they do, then we go back to the company who's doing the recall, and we say, okay, what happened here? How did this get disconnected? Because this recall notice should have reached. And I mean, sometimes it's because some places are buying products and reselling them and not kind of keeping that chain of, so the thing is, I could go, if I owned my own store, I could go to say Walmart and I could buy 20 cartons of eggs and I could take them to my store and resell them. Now, when Walmart gets the recall notice, they wouldn't know to tell me not to resell those eggs because they don't know what I did with them. So sometimes that's what happens. And sometimes people don't have the correct contact information, which is important. So if you're a reseller, if you're selling to places that are selling things again, you should have the contact information for them and make sure that it's updated so that if you had a problem, you could call them and or send them an email or mail like a letter letting them know that. So I mean, that's part of the recall, is that it should kind of go down to every level. And unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't happen. So once this is done, I'll get you to send me that, because then I want to follow up and make sure that that is not happening, because we don't want, say, Sobeys not sending out any letters. So every Sobeys is still carrying them, but they're all gone from Superstore. Just because each individual Sobeys store thought, oh, we must not have those eggs because we didn't get the letter from the head office, which, I mean, doesn't happen often, but it sometimes happens. Or again, someone buys something in bulk from a different store that doesn't know that they're reselling them, or that's not the way they're sold, so they don't need to keep that paperwork, and they wouldn't let you know that the product was recalled.
Another question before that last question. Now, I mean, we do farmers market, so most of these things are for store owners because some of us also, some of our vendors have, stores that they sell out from outside apart from coming to the market. So, and this came to mind while you were speaking. So, for instance, maybe I rear egg, I'm a farmer, and then I bring these eggs directly from my farm to like a farmer's market. How does, I know you mentioned earlier that that wasn't like you guys don't really go into like markets and stuff like that, but how do you ensure they are all safe? Is that the work of the health in inspection units?
So the province deals with that more than CFIA does. So the eggs that CFIA inspects are generally ones that would leave the province. So a lot of times, so if you say run a restaurant, or you have even if you make something, so you make pierogies, and you sell them only within Manitoba, you would need a license from the province, but you would not need a license from the CFIA. But if you lived in Manitoba and you made buns or bread and you sold some of them to Ontario and you sold some of them into Saskatchewan, then you need a CFIA license. Regardless, we want people, like there's traceability requirements. If you're making food, you're supposed to know where all your ingredients came from. And then if you sell your food, there's different levels. So if you're a bakery and you then sell your buns to a restaurant, so you know that restaurant's reselling the buns or they're putting them with the meal, you need to know how many buns you sold to that restaurant. If you are a bakery and just people come off the street and they buy the buns, say you're Tim Hortons as an example, and people just come in and buy the donuts, they don't have to record every single person that bought every donut. Just the same way that they don't, they don't record like in Walmart every single thing that you buy. So you wouldn't get an individual recall notice from Walmart and them saying like, oh, we know you bought those exact eggs, please stop using them. But if you're a bakery and you know that you're sending buns to a restaurant or you're a bakery and then you send your buns to Walmart and then Walmart resells them, you need to know what buns you sold to Walmart. So that kind of still works. If you are selling directly to your end consumer, then you don't generally need to keep records of every single person that bought your product. But if you were reselling them to, say, you have a bakery and you're reselling them to a restaurant down the street, you would need to keep records of that. So if you all of a sudden realized you had a problem in your bakery, you could contact the restaurant and say, stop using the buns. So that would be kind of the same with eggs. I know there's different rules for eggs with different provinces, so that if you're not selling them to the point where you're having like an egg grading station, then I think it is with the province. And the province is still involved even when people are doing eggs federally. Like these eggs went across Manitoba, BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, I think. So it was, the province was working on it and we were working on it, because the province is still involved with the chicken barns in Manitoba. I wasn't part of the actual like nitty gritty of the recall. I just know the province was involved. So it's up to you when you're selling products to know what the requirements are and who you need to talk to or who you need to get a license from. So that's why I kind of recommended right at the beginning is make sure that the province and even say your municipality or city you live in allows you to do those things before you get too far into it, because it'd be no good to say, okay, I'm going to become an importer, and then it turns out, the city won't let you do that out of your residence. You need to get a separate commercial building, and now you go, okay, that's too expensive. Even though we might say, we might not have a problem with that. If the city or the province says, no, you can't do that there, then that still is a reason you can't do it. So you got to check all the levels of.
The very, very, very last question, and thank you so very much. You've been super detailed in answering all our questions. Thank you. So the last question is, if someone wants to open a food testing lab, I didn't know individuals could open that. Outside registering for your company, what other maybe licenses or permits would you need?
That I don't know. Like I know we have specific labs that we have our own labs, and then I know there are well-known companies. So most of those so if you're running a food facility and you are sending things away for testing, so if I was the company who's say sending my eggs away for salmonella testing, let's just say, I would when I chose that company, I would need to know that it was like a legitimate company, and I'm not sure, like that's something maybe to reach out to the province about, because I would say, I'm not really sure. We don't approve labs, like the CFIA doesn't approve. We have our own labs for our own internal testing across Canada. So even say in Manitoba, sometimes we're sending things away to BC, sometimes we're sending things to Ontario. It just depends what kind of lab work we need. So we don't really use like local. I mean, if you were say in Ottawa, there for sure probably be a lab there. But we don't we, the CFIA, do not like license labs. We do not recommend labs. If I was doing an inspection and someone said, oh yeah, I send my food away from testing to lab X, I might ask them to show me how they know that that lab is like accredited to do the kind of test it's doing, meets whatever kind of regulations the lab needs. That would be, yeah, I don't know specifically. I don't think it would be particularly easy, but I honestly don't know.
Thank you. Another question came in, and I guess this is the last one. Do you need, I don't know how it's called, but I think it's phytosanitary certificate to
Yes,
get permits importing planting materials.
that unfortunately I don't know a whole bunch about. That would be through the plant health branch, and it would be, it's specific to each different product and then where they're coming from, because again, it's kind of the same as meat, and then there's different countries and different products that have different requirements because there are different risks. But that would not be through a Safe Food for Canadians license. That would be a fully separate.
Hey, does anybody have any question? Okay. Okay. Someone give us a clue about the food testing lab. Complete an
Oh, there we
online
go.
application form with ISED, and then they'll be able to maybe guide you, I guess. So let me just check if we have anybody with questions. No. Thank you so much. I would unmute anyone that wants to say a word of appreciation to Stephanie. She's been absolutely amazing. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. And then,
Well, and thank you for reaching out. I do appreciate, we try our best to educate people because I'd much rather people did their homework and knew exactly what they were doing rather than kind of feeling like we're catching somebody all of a sudden going, oh, everything you're doing, you're not supposed to do. And now, not that you're in trouble, but now we have to stop you. And it doesn't feel nice for us. And I'm sure it doesn't feel nice for the person.
thank you so much.
So yeah,
Okay, thank you so much. This was amazing. Thank you for your time. I'm just reading all the messages coming in. Thanks.
oh yes.
Thank you very much. Our next training will probably be very soon. We'll also try to bug the CBSA and get the time out of them so they can also come and educate us about some of the things where we're lacking information or we don't have, direct, especially when it affects us because most of the information are very general. So there are times we really want to narrow it down to things that like pertain to us or that affect us directly. And that's why we have all this kind of training to help our folks, get more knowledge. And we always want to be on the right side of the law. And
Yes.
this also helps us to do that. So thank you very much for your time. If there are no other questions, we'll call it today. Please, if you haven't registered, please register so that we can share the document maybe later in the day or tomorrow. This video would also be available to watch maybe on YouTube. We'll share that link as well, just to, if you need to, take some notes down from what we've learned so far. Okay, so that's about it. I will call it a day. Let me put the registration link just in case some folks would want to register so as to get the right info later or to get the document later. Just need to quickly find it. Okay, that's it. I knew we had a few questions regarding how to import easily or getting importation, um, like an imported information kind of thing. We would also share links of some importers within the community, and you can reach out to them. I've sent the form in for those that didn't have a chance to register earlier. Thank you very much. And please follow Niger Market Day on Instagram, on TikTok, on Facebook, and all the social media platforms. See you at the market sometime in your city, sometime this year. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Phil. You're free to unmute.